Hi there, and welcome to my talk, 10 Things You Probably Should Know About Databricks. I run a project. If you're interested in this and you enjoy this talk, to go find out more, it's called Daily Databricks. It does small actionable pieces of information. It's semi-regular and not daily, unfortunately, but I'm currently in the process of backfilling all the tips I provided in the past to a website called dailydatabricks.tips. If you want to learn new and wonderful hacks about Databricks, please do give it a check it out. I'm going to talk about some tips today. Some of those I've already covered in previous versions of this talk. Some of them are new, so do stick around if you've already seen this before and just see if there's something you can learn about Databricks. First thing I'm going to jump into, and hopefully this is really a simple tip that everyone's already used, but if you haven't, it's really cool. There's a notebook context object right inside of Databricks, and it allows you to get all sorts of metadata about your notebook environment. So everything from user credentials, emails, IP addresses, browser, cluster information, even the cell that you're executing this code exactly from. Really easy to do. You can grab the context object like that, right, and then you can do all sorts of stuff with it. If you want to grab a specific property, such as the notebook path that you're currently running in, you can do that too as a string, or you can grab everything in JSON and dump it and then use it to log in a logging platform somewhere for future analysis. An example of some of the properties you can get from there are, for example, the current cells property, the IP address of my IP address. I've redacted it because I don't want anyone to know my IP address. The cluster I was running on, my email address, and say the Azure object ID, if it has one, will be there too. So next tip, right, is describe stuff. So if you're used to describing tables, you can get get various properties. Hopefully you've used this before, but if you haven't, it's really useful and powerful, right? So in SQL, you can describe table. In the SQL experience of Databricks, you can get the schema level information, columns and the types and say the comments. You can also do show create table script, and that's very similar to right clicking on SQL Management Studio and going show table, script table as, right? And that'll get you the same sort of experience, right? You get a version of the table you can go away and rerun somewhere else and test it out. You can also describe the table extended, which gets you schema, partition, and catalog information, and you can run that to partition level to get kind of more granular information and insights. And you can describe detail, which is kind of my favorite command because it allows you to do a wide version of some of the information instead of a long version, so you don't have to pivot and do some processing of the table, and it allows you to select columns and use all sorts of stuff. So for example, describe table expanded gets you, for the New York taxi sample data set, gets you all sorts of stuff in there. There's created time, created by, location and table properties, all sorts of stuff. And if you do, say, describe detail in your table, you can go away and grab the partition columns, allowing you to do stuff, metadata, runtime-based metadata stuff with your partition columns. Really helpful and useful. You can also, start to use configuration objects in Spark. So if you're used to, so in Spark, you can do stuff like set configurations to optimize stuff or to get various properties at a cluster or a session level. That allows you to do some stuff, such as get all the properties on there, or get a specific property, or set a new value for a specific property. For example, if you've ever had to, have the out of memory exception for result sizes, using collect or moving data to pandas, for example, because you're bringing all your data from your clusters and workers into your driver node. Now you can kind of override it, right? So you can say, I've got a higher max result size, don't throw an exception. And that all assumes that your driver has enough memory, right? The physical machine. So you need to make sure that's, appropriately scaled and sized. But it is a useful tool, right? Sometimes you have to do that to do some very specific thing. Generally, it's not a good pattern for Spark, right? Because you're avoiding all the parallelism. So, it's useful. New tip right here. So if you want to use a Databricks managed identity, one exists, right? It's not an officially recommended Databricks solution. So there is no warranty, but it does exist. It's quite useful. So every time you create a Databricks workspace, right, there's a managed resource group created with it, and that contains all sorts of stuff like the networking for that workspace, maybe some VMs, some disks, stuff that are being managed by Databricks, right? One of the things it creates is a DB managed identity called DB managed identity, and that managed identity is usable like any other managed identity in Azure, right? So it's it's assigned to the workspace, and you can go away and use it to access any Azure resource that supports kind of that managed identity. That means you can authenticate without a client ID and secret, for example, if you wanted to, instead of a notebook. You wouldn't have to do anything besides, install the Azure Identity Library, and then do some code like this, which will get you a credential using the managed identity. And then you get a token. You can then use that to call, say Key Vault, Data Lake, any kind of, Azure service that supports identity. So basically all of them. And then you can use that credential without ever having exposed a secret ID or, having to go to Key Vault to get those values. Really, really powerful. But again, no warranty. So, use it with caution. There's also the Spark catalog, right? Spark catalog is like, a metadata repository in Spark, and it allows you to do stuff. This is slightly different with the Unity world, but it still kind of works. You can go away and get, the current catalog, the data. You can do stuff like list all the databases in a catalog, right? So I can get all my databases. Then I can get all my tables in that database, right? And then I start to build up all my columns in that database. So I can go, for every database, for every table, for every column, I want to profile it. I want to apply some validation. I want to do some metadata-driven processing. You can go away and do that really easily, right? Really, really easily. Another new tip is the variant data type, right? Brand new in Databricks. 15.3 is the runtime you need to start using it. But, it's a flexible data type. It holds semi-structured data. In the past, you had to kind of hold, JSON in a string column and then start extracting it and parsing it, causing all sorts of trouble. Now there's kind of variant that is allowing you to do some new and cool stuff, better performance. Included in Databricks are recommending it over using JSON strings. So it is, the kind of way forward. Even though it's a preview feature, it seems very much the way to go. So you can, have better evolution potentially of schema with that too. Pretty easy to enable. You create a table, variant is the type for the column, or if you've got an existing table, you just need to first, before you do anything, set the table properties to enable the variant preview, as the code shows you on there. Really useful, really powerful. Hopefully it's helpful to you. Another thing is, right, we talked about Spark configs. Now we're going to talk about how we can use them in a session to set defaults, right? So you want to configure defaults when you're creating, say, the Delta table. You can do that, right? You can set this Spark property or any Delta property that's a table property, and every single table created in that session will get those defaults, right? Really useful to start to set up kind of some standards around how your Delta tables are handled. For example, this one does the append only feature, and the append only feature allows you to do write once, no deletes in the table. It's kind of a worm pattern, right? Write once, read many times, makes it kind of an immutable table. Really, really useful and really, really powerful feature to use for Delta. Next, right? Hopefully everyone's doing this, but if they're not, you should enable column mapping, right, on your tables, because it decouples the data field names in the underlying files and the metadata, right? So you start to have, say, columns in the actual physical files that are GUIDs, but you can rename them, right? By just, it just renames the GUID reference to a different string. So you start to do that without having to rewrite all the files, and rewriting all the files is such, expensive and painful operation, potentially for large Delta tables. So it's really easy and really powerful. You can also drop tables from, drop columns from tables without having to rewrite a file. Really quite useful. And it's been around for a long time. Just note that it kind of works like a soft delete, right? It doesn't actually delete the physical columns. If you do drop them, you'll have to use a reorg function that rewrites the physical files. If you get into, like, say, a GDPR situation where you have to delete some data, the column, you will have to rewrite the files, to do that. So don't fall into that trap. How that works, alter the table with a column mapping mode, and then basically use your normal alter table features, and it will do what you want it to do. Really easy and usefully. Finally, right, tip number 10, performance testing, right? You can use this thing called NoOp as a format. It allows you to write data out as if you're writing it to any other format without actually physically materializing it into a data store. So you might have had this thing, where you write your data to a data lake, and then you have to remember to delete it, right? Because it's test data, and maybe it's got sensitive data. Having to delete it is a problem, it's a risk, and it's just effort. This will do everything up to the physical writing, right? Data lakes and storage services have SLAs and guaranteed minimum times. You do not need to worry about testing those times. You don't need to worry about spending the money of writing some test data out to test them, right? Just do this. You'll get to see how performant your pipeline is, and you can start to look at optimizing it and building better, more advanced pipelines if you need to by doing this. So yeah, thank you for listening. In 10 minutes, just about. On Twitter, follow me if you want to, talk about Databricks. There's also the website. So thanks for having me, and have a great rest of the day.